Hey, good morning, AP Psych. It is Tuesday, April 28th. Yeah, we are continuing on our psych disorder chart. So I think we're going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. But today we'll just stick with two disorders since they are of the same category. And then we'll do two tomorrow, Wednesday, and then Thursday we'll probably do three. Just kind of looking at our schedule, we kind of need to kind of maybe do three. But towards the end, there's just some singleton disorders, if you know, towards the end. So I'm kind of going to stick with two a day because yesterday we talked about two and it took 30 minutes. So again, I hope that you enjoyed the video on dissociative identity disorder. That Kim Noble case is very, very fascinating. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you do that. And again, check out the videos as they kind of supplement, read the book, obviously. And then also you can Google the cases to get more information. All right, so if you want to get out your psych disorder chart, we're going to be doing 8 and 9 today. And if you notice by the thumbnail, these are kind of in the mood disorder group, but they've been now moved to their own kind of category. Okay, so I'm going to give you a close-up here shot. I don't know why today I decided to write a little bit smaller, it looks like. So I'll do that. Yeah, so again, just a reminder as people kind of join, check Canvas, go to the assignment link. Make sure you're turning in all your assignments for the chapter groupings that are there. And then your labs for 18 and 15 are on announcements link. And then your lab for chapter 16 and 17 will just be this right here that we're doing, the two charts. So I'll add that probably to announcements, but I think we're good there. Okay. All right, so let me give you a close-up here. Okay, so we're 8 today. So we're going to do major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. Okay, major depressive disorder is in the category of depressive disorders. And bipolar is in the category of bipolar and related disorders. And both are learning target number 8. Okay. And then I have written down there at the bottom what in psychology we call the mood spectrum disorder or the mood spectrum. And I'm going to be referring to that quite a bit here and explaining these disorders. So basically on one side you have depression. And then on the other side you have mania. And then I put a little mark with a circle in the middle, which is where you and I primary live and behave and interact. Okay. Okay. So major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. Okay. And then I'll do a close-up of the entire chart as we go through it as well. So, and then also want to end with signs of suicide because these are our two number 1 and number 2 disorders in which we have the most suicide attempts and cases of suicide with these two disorders. When we did the signs of suicide this year, we talked a lot about major depressive disorder, but this is 1 and 2, I believe. And I believe dissociative identity is number 3. We talk about suicide attempts per psychological disorder. So obviously depression is the big one, which we'll talk about here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to explain it by the mood spectrum here. Okay. So depression, major depressive disorder is what would be the pinnacle of the depressive disorders. All right. There are actually several other types of depressive disorders, but major depressive is really the biggest one. So it's kind of like general anxiety disorder for anxiety disorders. With major depressive disorders, the major mood of these individuals is depressed. Okay, so what you have to kind of have as symptoms and requirements to be diagnosed with major is that you have to have a lot of the depressive symptoms, and you have to have them for a long time. Basically, what's going to happen is somebody who has MDD is going to be on the depressive side of the mood spectrum almost always. Okay. You and I are right here. Okay. So we generally fluctuate in the middle of the mood spectrum. We have days in which we're down, right? We get low, or, something traumatic has happened. We can feel really down, but we also have days in which we feel very excited, hyper, giddy, good, really positive. Okay. But we're generally going to stay in this circle here. Okay. We're generally going to stay around the middle of the mood spectrum. Okay. All right. Depressed people spend more time down here. And not only that, they go way down. Okay. And then mania, which we'll talk about, is the opposite end of that. Okay. When we talk about bipolar. Okay. So my major depressive patients spend most of their time, most of their life down here. And there might just be a few moments in which they kind of move up to more normal. But for the majority of their behavior and kind of their daily living, they are down in the depression side. Okay. All right. So this is pretty much their quality of life. They just stay down here. And then every once in a while, with medication or therapy, they can kind of start to move up. But generally, they're going to stay down here to this side. Okay. So a drastic contrast to you and I, who we're going to stay right around here. And again, we will have days in which we're down, but we will not sink so low to get all the way down to the depressive side, and we won't stay there. We'll generally rebound or recover. Okay. With major depressive disorder, this is their life. Okay. Now, again, I want to get back to, depression is not only psychological, but it's very, very physical. So in the DSM-5, there are also a lot of physical symptoms. Okay. So besides the lack of motivation, loss of interest, loss of self-worth, it says depressed mood. But again, this is a very parasympathetic disorder. So the parasympathetic nervous system is on, and it never allows us to get back to homeostasis, okay, to balance. So, the body hurts, it aches, it hurts to move. They're very lethargic, have no energy. So it is an illness. And when you are depressed, you will physically feel it, okay? And in my clinical time, obviously we dealt with a lot of people with anxiety and depression, and people often experience both because they're related. Okay, so it is very common that if I have anxiety, I will have periods of depression. Also, if I have depression, I will have periods of anxiety because they work on the same three neurotransmitters. Okay, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. So they're very related in the biochemical part of my brain. Okay, but both patients pretty much unanimously said this is the worst. The depression is bad stuff. It just is. It's a terrible feeling. It's a miserable experience. And they actually became very afraid of this. So our anxiety patients would have these little periods of depression, but they'd begin to fear them because they just were terrible, and just a bad experience. So, that is kind of the life of a major depressive person. Okay. Right. So we'll do depressive. Symptoms, which are their normal kind of everyday experience. Constantly at depressed mood spectrum. Okay, so let's do that. And I'll do a close-up of this here in a minute. So I got depressive symptoms, which are normal everyday experience, right? And they're constantly at depressive mood spectrum. So they're constantly at the depressive end, okay? All right. So this is biological. Okay. So again, we can't go around telling depressed people just to get happy, go do something fun, have a good experience. I don't know if you follow the lottery or whatever, but I know that one, I can't remember how long it was, but there was a lottery winner who had major depressive disorder, and they were not happy. The winning of the lottery, and it wasn't a huge one. I think, huge. I think it was like around $1.2 million. But obviously, that's something to get pretty excited about. But it didn't change their mood. They were down here. It didn't change the way they felt. There was a case study about it. You could also, in the news, wrote about it because they didn't seem very happy when they won it. They had to get a picture with the check. It didn't look like it. They just looked like they were down and not happy and elated. So this is not dependent on environmental factors very often. It's just they're depressed. And even in good times and bad times, they're still depressed. Okay. So it's a biological issue. It's an issue with the brain, neurochemicals, that parasympathetic nervous system just never allows them to physically get up to a normal state. Okay. And it is neurotic. Okay. Because depression and anxiety are very, very heavily related. Okay. And often, again, you will have both. And that's why also when we talk about treatments, anti-anxiety medication can be used for depressed patients, and antidepressants can be used for anxiety patients. So, because it's working on the same three chemicals. Okay. All right. So number 8 there. So I've got depressive symptoms, which are, I should put everyday experience and cross out normal. Let's do that because it's not normal. Right? It fits our diagnostic criteria for abnormal behavior, so we probably should use the word normal in there. Okay, so depressive symptoms are everyday experience, constantly at depressed mood spectrum. All right, so at the depressed end of the mood spectrum, it is biological, and then we're going to say it's neurotic. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's major depressive disorder. And again, there are other types of depressive disorders. And they're all basically differentiated by the amount of time that you have the symptoms and the severity in which you have the symptoms. So, I also think the DSM-5 took out the bereavement clause. So I think up to the DSM-4, they had, like, if you lost a loved one, you were allowed to be depressed, I think with like around 2 years. And you could be treated for depression, but they weren't going to diagnose you with a depressive disorder because you did have a pretty traumatic environmental factor. But now they've removed that. And so, I could be diagnosed with major depressive disorder because of a loss of a loved one or whatever. And then when my symptoms elevated and I got back up to here, then they would take the diagnosis away instead of using the bereavement, because people can bereave differently, obviously, and the levels of depression were becoming very severe even with that clause. So they just kind of throw that out. So, okay. But just also keep in mind that there are other types of depressive disorders. We're just going to cover the main ones that AP and most dual credit curriculums want us to talk about. Okay. All right. Bipolar disorder, which is in the category of bipolar and related disorders. Now, both of these used to be in the category of mood disorders, okay, which is what I took a picture of in the thumbnail. And then in the DSM-5, what they did is they kind of separated them out. Now, they're still referred to as mood disorders because of the mood spectrum, okay, because they are abnormal levels of mood, all right? But we have more depressive disorders now. So they pulled those out, and then bipolar and related disorders, we're starting to really understand that disorder better. And so there are different types of bipolar. There's bipolar 1, bipolar 2, then there's rapid cycling. I mean, they're becoming several types of bipolar as well. Okay. All right. Now, bipolar actually gets its name from, which used to be called manic depressive. Okay. So that basically tells you I'm manic and I'm depressive at the same time. Okay. And then what they did is they changed the name to bipolar because they're using the mood spectrum. And at the two poles are depression and mania. Okay. So the bipolar patient, where you and I stay right here in the middle, they are never in the middle. They go manic to depressive. Okay. And the majority of the time, the mood is at depression, okay? Because if you think about it, my body can maintain a depressive state. Mania, however, is a very elated, I'm having so much energy, I can't sleep, I can't talk, I talk so fast, I'm fidgety, I move around, I'm expending a lot of energy. This is a sympathetic side, okay? So my body and my brain can actually run out of gas, run out of energy here, okay? And usually when that happens, they crash all the way down here, okay? But for most of the bipolar, depression is the main mood, and then they can slip into these periods of mania, okay? Got a question here. Glenn Clausen, is there something that causes the unbalanced neurotransmitters in MDD, like an event, or does it just happen? Okay, so back here, good question, Delaney. Both. So you can have a traumatic major event that slips you into this depressed mode, and then they just stay there and have symptoms that are strong enough for MDD. Most of the times, though, I know it can be caused by traumatic brain injury, concussions, but also it can just be inherited genetically. I know females, there's both of these depressive disorders and bipolar. There's a huge genetic link in females. So it could just be, the way the body and the brain is meant to run. Now, what we do know is that, also there's a lot of studies on that hormonal change that you go through in adolescence can kind of start some of these imbalances and issues that the brain has. And there's specific structures, obviously, as well. So yes and yes to your question. So it's pretty complex, but most of the time there is a huge biological component to it, whether it's inherited or whether it was caused by something from a brain injury or a trauma or an environmental trauma trigger, if you will. Okay. Okay. So I think we've talked about depression. So mania, or being manic, and everybody's like, well, this would be the great side to be. But this is where psychosis comes in here. Okay. When you are manic, you lose touch with reality. You break from reality. So yes, it is very euphoric, but you are no longer based in reality. When manics hit manic, they become delusional. They become detached. They think they have more money than they have. They go on these lavish spending sprees. They perform self-defeating, self-dangerous behaviors all the time. They'll travel all over the world. They'll wake up and they won't know how they got to where they got because they were partying all night long. If you are familiar with Charlie Sheen, if you remember way back in 2010 and 11 when he was going through his manic side of bipolar, he has bipolar, and then he obviously abuses drugs. So that's really, again, it's an attempt to self-medicate, which happens a lot in these two disorders. So drug abuse is also hugely associated with these two because they're just self-medicating is what they're doing. And Charlie Sheen abused cocaine, base, whatever he wanted to call it. But you definitely got to see, he'd just throw these lavish parties. He would actually drive a car in his house. So that if you've seen him advertise for Fiat, it's actually something he did on a manic side. He brought his car inside his mansion and drove it around during a party. In the interviews, he was talking about he had tiger blood, Adonis DNA. He has eye winning, he just was just not in touch with reality. And that's what happens with the manic side. Okay. Also with the manic side, you just expend so much energy. And actually the book has a great picture. It has a PET scan of a bipolar patient, and it shows you the depressed brain, the manic brain, and then the depressed brain again. And what you're going to see is the depressed brain is very, very low. There's very little activity. And then you see the manic brain, and it's just exploded with activity. It looks like it's on fire. And that's actually how some manics have actually reported. They feel like their brain's on fire. They feel like their brain is hot. It's warm. Some people even report that they can hear the brain popping. Like you can hear the neurotransmitters communicating and popping. And then after that, the last brain is even extremely depressed. It's even more depressed than the first brain. So it goes depressed, manic, and then it goes more depressed, okay? Which is generally what happens. After the manic episode, they crash because the body has expended so much energy, the brain can't maintain that side, okay? But their life is just totally between depression and mania. Okay. And this one is biological. And this one is psychotic. Okay. Okay. So they go between depression and mania, right? Okay. On the mood spectrum, logical. And then this one is psychotic, because this one, when they hit the manic side, they become delusional. Okay. And there are a whole bunch of cases, like celebrities. I think the book has some more historical cases that we believe were bipolar. This one also can be heavily influenced by drug use. So, the drug use can damage the brain. So if you have repetitive drug use, it can obviously create the neurological environment for bipolar, also schizophrenia, which we'll talk about. But also, it's just a main side effect of bipolar, because there was a while there that we just really didn't have any good medication for bipolar patients, and they're suffering mental anguish, and so they're looking for something that can kind of help them, and they end up self-medicating.